So, among the controversy around Scotland's gender reform bill and around whether trans women, as in biological men who claim they're women, going into women's prisons, Nicola Sturgeon was interviewed by ITV, and basically her logic on trans women are women but shouldn't be allowed into women's prisons has been debunked.
My question is, are all trans women women? You haven't answered that question.
Well, that's not the point that we're dealing with
That's
here.
the question I'm asking.
Trans women are women, but in the prison context, there is no automatic right for a trans woman.
So there are contexts where a trans woman is not a woman?
No, there is there is circumstances in which a trans woman will be housed in the male prison estate.
Is there any context in which a woman born as a woman will be housed in the male estate?
Look, we're talking here about trans women.
And I'm now asking about women born as women.
I don't think there are circumstances there, but...
So it's different for trans women?
Well, Jess, I think you put it well, right? There are several cases now of it being evident that Nicola Sturgeon's self-ID policy, in which, let's just remind people, that means that you don't need a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria or anything else meaningful to change your gender and actually access single-sex spaces. And boy, oh boy, have the convict chickens come home to roost in Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland. Some inmates have actually given interviews to the press, Jess, in which they've said they have a fear of showering and other basic functions because of the participation of men, of biological men, in these single-sex spaces. Now, let's not forget, women in prisons are some of the most vulnerable women in society. It might have been rape as a child. It might have been sexual abuse, sexual exploitation that's led them onto a path of crime. Goodness only knows. But these women should not have to contend with men in these spaces. And I honestly think that in the way in this interview goes, you can see Nicola Sturgeon flapping, right, in a way in which I don't think you often see her do. And I don't mean to speak up Nicola Sturgeon. She's not a politician I especially am fond of, but she's normally quite a polished actor. She's normally quite a polished politician. Unflappable, I think it's safe to say. But Jess, it looks to me that the only thing she's managed to secure independence from here is the independence from reality, because it actually has. It's taken not testimonies from female survivors of domestic violence, not testimonies from those in female prisons, but not the likes of J.K. Rowling even, who, let's not forget, was a survivor of domestic violence herself. But it's taken bad press, bad publicity, bad public polling to actually make her act. So much for being a champion for women, eh? It's clear all along to people like you and I and others that Scotland didn't want this, and that actually this was a naked attempt to drive a wedge between her and the London government, between the Scottish Nationals and the London government. So they could say, look, you've got to vote for independence because actually we can't allow biological men into single-sex spaces. But the people of Scotland, Jess, are saying with a big shrug of the shoulders, I'm not sure I want that, you tartan-clad loon, right? It's massively backfired on her and actually made Rishi Sunak look like the stronger contender. So I think she's had her day, to be honest with you, Jess.
I think the issue of trans prisons just exposes the reality of gender ideology, because the whole transgender acceptance, people think of just, a poor person with gender dysphoria who just wants to go into the women's toilets, just wants to be accepted. But this is the reality of it. It's not just about pronoun badges. It's about allowing dangerous men going into women's prisons. And to those who are thinking like, oh, you can make an exception with, prisons, for example, and the rest is fine. No, I think these people need to have their cake and eat it too. This is the reality of gender ideology. The same people have been saying, oh, it only requires you to feel a certain way and then you can be one gender to the next every single day. And these are the same people who are now going, maybe it's a bit too step far when it comes to prisons. It's absolutely ridiculous. These people need to be very consistent with what they're saying, because otherwise, it's fine with the pronoun badges, it's fine with their ideology being forced in other people's faces, but when it gets too far and it becomes inconsistent with them, they're inconvenient with them. That's when they're fine with, abandoning this whole gender ideology. Whereas if they do believe trans women are women, surely they should be saying that these women, well, these biological men who say they're women, should go into women's prisons, but they see the reality, the harm that causes, so they're backtracking with that.
Exactly, and Nicola Sturgeon, as I say, is flapping around more than the sturgeon fish, right? I mean, it does prove, as you rightly say, that the gender self-ID and the whole mantra of trans women are women to be completely indefensible, right? Proven by her inability to defend that even on the most basic level. Because in this clip, she basically tries to argue that if indeed that there was an argument to be made that trans women are women until they're a criminal, and then they're not a woman, and that we idiotic bigots need to actually just keep up and stop accepting that immutable sex is a thing, and that actually we need to get on board with this ever evolving position of trans ID, of trans ideology and gender ideology. And I really hope and I really think, actually, because I've never seen a panic like this before, that this is the beginning of the end for Nicola Sturgeon. I'm only sad that it hasn't taken the fact that kids are leaving school in Scotland unable to have the most basic literacy and numeracy, that kids are unable to actually access the most basic dentistry. And this was before the pandemic, right? Scotland was on this trajectory before the pandemic. And you see things like the budget deficit, again, before the pandemic, largest in Europe. There are so many points in which I think Nicola Sturgeon has gotten a free lunch by the media. The media has turned its eye away and saw her as some tartan-clad progressive. Well, she's not. She's a tartan-clad authoritarian, right? And she's wanting to clamp down on women's single-sex spaces and actually tell the media that they shouldn't be asking difficult questions. I think it's wrong. And I think actually the women of Scotland ought to know that their sex-based rights are not safe with this person. She is not an ally of women. She is not an ally of so-called progress. She actually wants to take women and their sex-based rights backwards, back to a time in which actually men ruled the roost. And I don't think that's any future that even an independent Scotland, Jess, should even countenance.